Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Nordic Sound channel. Today I am going to be trying out a new format for two reasons. First, I've been pretty open on Instagram about the fact that album reviews are pretty time-consuming, so I figured it might be more interesting and also manageable for me to sort of cram all of the album reviews into a single monthly video in a this month in Nordic music type thing. And then also, I've got about a half a dozen releases to catch up on, and so this is also just a little sprint for me to get caught up. So in the comments down below, let me know if you like this sort of one-stop shopping all the album reviews in one monthly video, or if you would very much like me to continue the one video for one album style format. So plus and minuses to both, but let me know what you think. Without further ado, let's get into this month-ish in Nordic music albums. So first up, we have the legendary Mari Boine and her musical jazz partner Bugge Wusseltoft, hope I pronounced that correctly, with the new release from By Norse Records, Amame. And this is an interesting album for Mari Boine because she's always been pretty adventurous with her music styles and the genres she touches in. And this album is yet another foray into the sort of jazz fusion, but at least from my point of view, it seems like there's a lot more of the also yoic side of her put into it as well. So the highlights of this album are Mari's voice, as always. Bugge's piano playing is very smooth, and it just like fits really well in with Mari Boine's very quiet singing style you can hear on this album. And of course, how they both sort of come together in this pretty unique fusion of yoic and like smooth combo jazz that you would expect to hear in like, at least here in the States, in like a sort of recreated speakeasy. That is the sort of style that goes here, and Mari's voice just fits in so well with it. So even though this is not going to be her typical sound that those who love, for instance, her timeless Gula Gula, it's not that sort of music that is sort of the star of the show on this album. Some of it, in some tracks, the yoic side does come out stronger than others, but this is solidly, I would say, like a combo jazz album. So if you found her at Midgardsblot and you had for some reason never listened to her before, this is not the album that's going to give you more of that style that she performed on the stage in Midgardsblot. It's very much a jazz album. So with that said, my favorite tracks off the album are Ella, which is a remake of a past song of hers just in this new style, and pardon my pronunciation, Iadnan Bhakti. These are the two songs that stood out to me the most. So to wrap up my thoughts, if you are a fan of Mari Boine as an artist and as a singer, no matter what she does, like me, this album is just more of Mari Boine to love, and also Bugge Wusseltoft puts a great touch in as well with his stellar piano playing. But if you were coming to Mari Boine for more of the Gula Gula style, probably wait for some future albums she might have cooking up. So those are my thoughts on Amame. Next, we have Spine by Myrkur. So this is solidly a hard rock album, which I know has led to some polarizing receptions. Myrkur is, I feel like any good artist, already a pretty divisive figure, especially for those of you way back with her sort of glass ceiling breaking black metal albums. She has always been a divisive figure. And this one has people even more torn because people thought that maybe she would continue with the folkesonga style of music, but then some people were hoping that she would go back to black metal or heavy metal, and instead she gives us this hard rock album that also had like a really interesting, I will say interesting promotion to it with her like very contemporary art dance style video with the moth eyes painted over her eyelids. It was definitely artsy and it was definitely contemporary leading up to it. And for that reason, like, I didn't actually keep up with the promotion or the build up to it. I didn't listen to any of the singles leading up to the album because I sort of wanted to see the whole thing in front of me before I developed any thoughts. And so while I was driving back from Wyoming a few weeks ago and I had nothing else to do, I was like, oh, wait, the album, Spine, I got to put it on and see what it is. And I got to say, I was very pleasantly surprised. But in a way that I know that some people are probably not going to be that into it, where you have the people who love her folkesonga style, and you love the people who have her old heavy metal style. This album, and this is what I like about it, this album sort of bridges the gap between the two, where the vocals are very clearly inspired from folkesonga, but then there is that not as like heavy of a black metal backing band, but there is enough of the influence there that I can confidently say the backing band is meant to evoke her older style. So like a good artist, at least in my opinion, that always wants to shake things up, and this is what fascinates me about Myrkur as a musician and as an artist, is she always seems to be looking for like a new door to kick down for herself. And so deciding to neither go with the black metal or the straight folkesonga and instead blending them in this really interesting way has led to a pretty unique album that I enjoyed, that is even reminiscent to me of early Ulver, which is just awesome. This album to me was pretty great. It was awesome. It wasn't as good to me as folkesonga just because that album was like lightning in a bottle, but that doesn't mean the album was bad. I know that certain reviewers on the internet had very strong opinions about it, that even made it clear to me that some of them didn't even listen to it before reviewing it, which is a problem in music journalism. But after I listened to it front to back, I really loved it, and the standout tracks to me were Like Humans and My Blood is Gold. And these tracks also really highlight probably my favorite part of the album, and that is Myrkur as a lyricist. There's some just like one-liners in these songs that really stick with you. The first one that happened to me was in Like Humans, talk to me like humans do. There's just something about not only the way she sings it, but there's something about how evocative that line is on its own, where like for the whole week after I listened to it, I couldn't stop either humming or just saying that phrase, because it's just such an evocative phrase. And so the lyrics are also a pretty stellar aspect of this album too. Definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of Myrkur, but if you're coming into this hoping for more folkesonga or hoping for more of the heavy metal side, either of those camps that want a very specific thing are probably not going to be fully satisfied, but those of you like me who are just fascinated with Myrkur as an artist and always interested in what she's doing next, definitely give Spine a spin. That was fun to say. You will not be disappointed. Next up, Insomnium returns to these reviews once again with a follow-up EP to Anno 1696, Songs of Dusk. This is a collection of songs that were cut from the album, but for very understandable reasons after listening, they couldn't just let them sit on the shelf. So Insomnium offers more of what people love of them, that melodic death metal with that really poetic artsy side, I would say a little blackened side of melodeath, with also this really evocative atmosphere that made Anno 1696 so great. So this is just a little short and sweet follow-up to this EP. If you loved Anno 1696 like I did, this is just more of what we loved about it. And because it's just a 3-track EP, not going to give any highlight tracks, just listen to the whole thing. It's not that much of a time commitment. And yeah, it was a pleasant surprise to see that there was more of Anno 1696 still to listen to, even after I had already exhausted my vinyl of it quite a few times. So next up, we have a debut album from a new folk band out of Sweden, Tonskalv, with their debut album Död, Hunger och Favoritpolskor, Death, Hunger, and Favorite Dances or Favorite Polskas. And I loved this album. It was a very pleasant surprise. It came up on my feed, gave it a spin, and it was just more of that Scandinavian folk style in the style of Dreamer's Circus or the Floating Sofa Quartet. It's just that charming, more accessible type of Scandinavian folk music, since the more traditional side can sometimes be hard to get into as an outsider, especially if you don't really know much of how the genre works. So this is, I would say, if you've been wanting to get into Scandinavian folk music, but you try and listen to like the more traditional stuff and sometimes it goes over your head, this would be an album to listen to. It's short, it's sweet, it's in the style of our favorite bands like Dreamer's Circus, and there's just plenty for everyone on here. What I really love about this band is that they have the flute, which adds just such a beautiful like folk tale charm to it. I can't explain it, but whenever I hear a flute playing in a folk band, it just puts me in like a fairy tale, like a Brothers Grimm, Asbjörnsen and Moe type mindset. So this band, not only does it have the flute, which adds that unique charm to it, it's also well produced, it's well arranged, and it's just performed very flawlessly, with a lot of original tunes, but also traditionals in the Nordic style. So my favorite tunes from this album are going to be King Selma and Halling. Next up, we have Den Lyse Dag, the debut album from Synnove Plasse, a name some of you might be familiar with, especially if you've been listening to Gangar's latest album, where she does the guest vocals on Sukri Arisut, and which is just an awesome performance that is quite the earworm, as I mentioned in my review of that album. But what fascinates me about her is that I've been seeing her name pop up as guest appearances, and finally, we have an album of just her own work. And even more striking is what I've loved about her is her voice is just so... She has a voice that's very similar to Emilia Lorenzen's in the way that it just grabs and holds your attention, and also Dionysia of Mio, right? It's this voice that holds your attention and doesn't let go. So when I put on this album, and it's an album of almost exclusively just her voice without accompaniment, Den Lyse Dag is already a unique experience in that way, but then she just has, as I said, a compelling voice that is singing these traditional tunes that she's sort of been collecting from her home in Folldal in Österdalen. And her voice and these melodies, this is what I really love about this album, and this is what always strikes me about strictly vocal music, is her voice and these folk melodies just take you back to a time and a world that feels ancient, but in the present at the same time. And I don't know, there's just something that just is very homey and homely and just warm about that. And so because of how this album is structured of a lot of very short vocal songs, there's really no highlight tracks that I can give to you guys. Just put it on and let it take you away to someplace special, because that is definitely what this album does. So, Synnove also happens to have worked with the next musician here, the Gjermund Larsen Trio, and their new album, the Tøyen Sessions. Gjermund Larsen Trio was one of my first Norwegian folk bands that I listened to regularly, where I sort of used them as a basis to jump from to listen to someone new. They were like a home base in Norwegian traditional music. So they don't do strictly traditional music, though, because they have this very progressive and even like classically influenced flavor that they put into Norwegian folk. And this album, as all of Gjermund Larsen's Trio's albums do, features world-class playing of Norwegian traditionals on the fiddle, underscored with this beautiful piano and the double bass. Represent more double bass players. And more than just the playing, is Gjermund Larsen's music has always had this really signature mood to me that's hard to put into words, but it's very cozy. It just reminds me of like a snowy morning, something like that. It's just, again, it's one of those things that's hard to put into words. But Gjermund Larsen's music, if you haven't listened to it, this is definitely a good album to get started with. It's got this great mood that I always go to his music for, and this is probably best captured in the track Blå. And yeah, that's really all I have to say about the new album. His music really speaks for itself, especially because he's been in the scene for so long. But if you're looking to get into the more progressive and maybe like classically flavored Norwegian folk music, the Gjermund Larsen Trio's Tøyen Sessions are definitely a good introduction. So next up, we have Ólafur Arnalds dropped a surprise EP with just a name that is just so Ólafur Arnalds, Trying to Think of Nothing. It's a very short EP that sounds like he's thinking out loud, but because he's such a stellar musician, it doesn't mean it sounds sloppy or anything. It's just, this album makes me feel like I'm listening to a musician thinking out loud at their instrument. And so if you love Ólafur Arnalds already, this is more of what we already love about him. If you haven't listened to his music before, this is just a nice bite-sized EP of sort of taking you through his style of music. So that's all I have to say about Trying to Think of Nothing. It's a short and sweet album, short and sweet review. To round out the full-length album reviews here, we have, of course, Nytt Land's new album, Torum. Now, Nytt Land, you guys know I've been a fan of for a very long time. Anatoly was one of the very first musicians I had to interview on this channel, and what I've always loved about their style of dark folk is there is dark folk, and then there's Nytt Land, where their music sounds like the oppressive nature of like a dark northern forest. If you think back to that folk horror movie that everyone loved, The Ritual, if you think back to The Ritual, a lot of the horror elements were in the fact that dark, deep, thick northern forest led such an oppressive atmosphere that added to the drama and to the tension, right? This is what listening to Nytt Land's music can feel like, and that's what I love about it, because so few bands actually give you that experience musically. And this also fits into what Nytt Land has been wanting to do with their music, and especially with Torum, where they've been the most vocal about it, is Nytt Land wants to sort of like rectify a misunderstanding and an under representation of Siberia through their music and also through their knowledge of Siberian folk culture. So if any band's going to do this, if any band is going to sort of like represent Siberia musically, it's going to be Nytt Land. And Nattramn does this beautifully. But I have a catch here. The first track on the album, Ólafur, starts off with very little music production, right? So a lot of what creates the soundscape around bands like Nytt Land, like Vardruna, like Heilung, is their very thick music production that happens after recording, right? This is what creates that big soundscape that we've all come to know and love. Now, Ólafur starts off the complete opposite. All you have is this ambient track that I'm assuming they recorded themselves in the woods near their home. And then it's just a frame drum and just Natasha singing her incredible signature throat singing style, right? And that is the whole song, is just a frame drum doing a simple beat over and over again, and Natasha singing, with the only accompaniment being that ambient forest track. And even though the rest of the album I knew wasn't going to be like this because I listened to the singles leading up to it, it stoked my imagination to think of what sort of album could Nytt Land make if they restricted themselves to just acoustics and ambient tracks. Now, this is always a creative option. Maybe they don't want to do this. And even though I loved how the rest of this album turned out, just the way that it starts with Ólafur just took my imagination, and I ran wild with thinking what would happen if Nytt Land did an album that was almost purely acoustic and focused on just like 1 to 3 instruments. I think that'd be pretty cool. And even though, of course, they might not want to do that, that's not their creative vision, that's fair. It's just hard to not think of like, what if? I think that would be a killer album, even if it was just an EP. I would love to listen to it. But moving on to how the album actually is, not just where my imagination went with the opening track. This is probably the strongest that Nytt Land has been, in my opinion. They have these brooding, slower chant tracks that just draw you into this trance state that a lot of us listen to this style of music for. But then you have tracks like Risa Ragnar, which is just like Risa Ragnar, and it's just like gets you going. And I love dark folk that can get me sort of headbanging, right? That's sort of like the best of both worlds. You have that soundscape of dark folk that we all love, but then the energy of heavy metal, which is one of the source genres for this style of music. So anyway, this album, stellar. I love seeing Nytt Land grow and evolve. I love seeing that they're sort of like catalyzing around this position of representing their home. I feel like that is always a present issue with musicians from underrepresented parts of the world. So more power to them. I love how this album turned out. I'm really looking forward to how they represent Siberia in the future. Love, of course, Natasha's very unique style of throat singing that always captures everyone. And yeah, I'd be interested to hear a Nytt Land acoustic album sometime in the near future. But if you guys stick with this, that's awesome too. So that's rounding out the full-length album reviews and the EPs, and I want to conclude the video with just bringing 2 singles to your guys' attention. Runahild gave us a single, In Between Worlds, very shortly after just giving us her Free Spirit album very recently. Single's great. If I remember correctly, it was recorded either at or as a result of her performance at the French Medieval Music Festival. So if you love Runahild, you'll love the single. So lastly, I just want to conclude the video here with highlighting an artist that I've somehow gone this entire channel's duration without even mentioning. So you guys know I've beat this drum constantly, pun fully intended, that dark folk can get redundant, stale, repetitive. Dedicated a whole video to it, right? And in retrospect, Nattramn should have definitely been in that video. I do not know how I left him out. And so I've been a huge fan of his album Veðurstafur. He walks this line between Vardruna and Viavaki, but he has his own sound and his own compositional style that is definitely worth mentioning as unique and not just part of the noise that dark folk can be. So this is my way of rectifying the fact that he should have been in that video, and I should have definitely mentioned his music by now. He recently released a single, Segurdrivas Lærdom, and it's just really great if you want to listen to his style, what he has to offer that's unique from other dark folk bands. Give it a listen. But even more importantly, listen to Veðurstafur. I've had his music on the official playlist for the channel, and I listen to that album all the time. I have no idea how I left it out. But anyway, this single was just released. Hopefully it's evidence of another album coming soon from him, because he's great. And then lastly, I have to say, it is worth following him on Instagram just for his photography alone. He takes excellent photos of just like the forest floor in what I'm assuming is Sweden. Don't fact check me on that. But it's just the mossy stumps with these beautiful mushrooms and just, anyway. Also worth following him on Instagram because he's a great photographer, but also keep up with his wonderful music. So this is my this month-ish, sort of stretched it till maybe a month and a half with some of these reviews, but just trying to get caught up here. Let me know down below if this is a format that you would like me to iterate on and try to improve on, or if you were just like, Jameson, cut it out. We just want the one video, one album. I understand that too. Just want to hear some input, trying to find out how to fit album reviews in a way that is both sustainable, but is also offering value to you guys. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you listen to at least one of these albums, if not all of them, which you should. And I will see you guys on the next video. Take care.